Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to decode the profoundly insightful poetry of Oluyomi Oladadavid. We're really diving deep into how she uses this creative, almost architectural imagery to communicate some incredibly sharp observations about our super complex, globalized world. If you've ever felt like, modern economics is just way too abstract or totally disconnected from everyday reality, well, you are absolutely going to love how she breaks it all down. So let's jump right in. But before we actually analyze her poetic work, it's pretty vital to understand the woman behind the words and the unique branding she uses to share her insights. This right here represents a space where technical insights, policy briefs, and poetic contemplations all intersect. She isn't just writing poetry just for the sake of making things rhyme. No, she's using it as a very deliberate vehicle to dissect these massive global systems. Her own biographical mission statement really anchors her poetry. She says, quote, "I am a Nigerian and I love people. I am concerned about global development and transformation." She is deeply, deeply driven by her Nigerian roots and her earnest desire for positive global transformation. And honestly, understanding this helps us read her work not just as art, but as a passionate plea for global equity. Let's look at what truly fuels her writing. Her core passions are all about generating tangible solutions, influencing actual policy and strategy, and, maybe most importantly, providing much-needed clarity in a really confusing world. Whenever we read her work, we've got to remember her ultimate goals are guided strongly by her faith-based worldview. She writes from a perspective of ultimate accountability, really just aiming to make sense of the systems that govern us all. All right, Section 1, Firms of Unusual Size Extracting Resources. With that foundation set, let's begin our breakdown of the poem itself. Listen to the rhythm she creates here. Firms of unusual size spread where resources are. Multinational windows oversee sandy seashore. She uses this really specific motif of unusual size to describe corporate entities that have just grown so huge they literally spread across the entire globe. Notice that vivid visual of multinational windows overseeing a sandy seashore. What's really fascinating here is how seamlessly we can translate her poetic metaphor directly into global economics. She's describing exactly how massive multinational corporations act as these towering overseers. They sit behind literal and figurative glass windows, basically extracting resources from natural local environments, the sandy seashores of the world, so to speak. And this kind of prompts us to pause for a second and ask ourselves, who truly oversees the world's resources? When she paints this picture of massive, unusual firms, she's asking us to consider how these entities impact our own physical environments and our local economies day in and day out. Moving on to Section 2, the multilingual landscape, towers and plants. Here, she shifts our gaze upward. She continues her motif perfectly, looking at towers of unusual height that are intertwined with a multilingual landscape. We go from the sweeping breadth of massive corporations to the towering height of industry, watching over the plants, which, if you think about it, could mean both literal botanical life and massive industrial factories. And this brilliantly illustrates the crazy duality of our modern world. She's connecting the physical industrial towers with the invisible, yet overwhelmingly complex, multilingual network of global communication. We literally live in a world dominated by both heavy physical infrastructure and these invisible, lightning-fast data networks. So consider why she emphasizes the need to hone a prudent ear. In a world that is incredibly connected, yet toweringly complex, a multilingual landscape demands that we actually listen carefully. Are we truly hearing the different voices in our global economy, or are we just, staring at the towers? Okay, Section 3, Minds of Unusual Depth, Poverty and Truth. Now she's moving from massive external structures to the internal human condition, and this is perhaps her most poignant reflection. She intentionally pairs minds of unusual depth with the stark, grounded reality of the poor. She introduces this concept of multidimensional truth, meaning a truth that isn't flat or simple, but deeply, deeply layered. So the absolutely crucial point is this. Remember her passion for providing clarity and real, actionable solutions. She is arguing here that shallow, one-dimensional fixes, they'll always fail. Only nuanced, multidimensional truths, deeply researched, complex policy solutions can truly enact the global development and poverty alleviation she's pushing for. When we look at the landscape of global development, we really must reflect on her assertion here. Shallow solutions are just never enough for multidimensional suffering. It absolutely demands a depth of mind and a depth of strategy to truly move the needle on global poverty. Let's look at Section 4, Streets and Messages Occupying History. Broadening her scope to the massive flow of information, notice how she uses the imagery of incredibly wide streets and intersecting sundry lanes to describe the omnipresence of modern media. And that phrase, occupy human history, that is incredibly powerful. She isn't just saying media is present, she's saying it is actively taking up residence in the timeline of humanity. She's illustrating how the sheer volume of multimedia information now occupies and maybe even dictates the course of our historical record. We aren't just writing history anymore. History is being occupied by this endless, overwhelming stream of digital messages. And finally, Section 5, Ants and Accurate Knowledge, the final stanza. Zooming all the way into the absolute smallest of creatures, she shifts drastically from massive corporate towers and sprawling firms all the way down to ants of unusual sense. She suggests that it's these tiny, persistent, noble efforts that ultimately bear the weight of truth, leading us to accurate knowledge. This completely illustrates the cohesive structural pattern hidden in her work. Think about it. Size, height, depth, breadth, and finally, sense. She deliberately juxtaposes physical scales of extreme size with the intricate, connected, multi-networks of our society. Multinational, multilingual, multidimensional, multimedia, and multi-choice. It is literally a perfect architectural map of modern global economics. The ultimate takeaway from her entire poem, and honestly her broader body of work, is that we just cannot rely on passive observation. Asking the right multi-choice questions, like that persistent, sensible ant, is what builds the accurate knowledge needed to drive the global transformation she so deeply desires. It takes real effort, depth, and prudence. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to really reflect on her final stanza. Look at the towering systems around you, but channel the unusual sense of the ant. Ask yourself, what part do you play in asking the right questions? And how will you apply accurate knowledge to transform the world around you? Thanks so much for exploring this fascinating material with me today.